for joining me on a quilting tale today. My name is Shaylin, and in today's video, I want to dress up our holiday table a little more. I inherited a beautiful 8-piece set of dishes from my great aunt, my great grandmother's sister, and we use these a lot during Christmas, Thanksgiving, special dinners, and it's a beautiful set as is. I thought though that I could just try to dress up the table a little more by making a table runner that goes well with these beautiful dishes, and maybe even some napkins that coordinate. But before we do that, I want to show you how to make an easy simmer pot mix to bring in the wonderful fragrance of the holiday season. And at the very end of the video, I'll show you how you can package it to give as a gift. So let's do that first. Here's one of the plates from the dishes that are going to be the inspiration for this table runner, both the colors and the motif. I love these oak leaves and acorns. These dishes aren't too florally, but still have those nature elements in them. I just love the coloring, and then the metallic gold that rims all the cups and plates, and there's a little serving bowl and everything that goes with it. It's just a beautiful set. And so I wanted to make a table runner that wasn't overtly Christmas, that could be used for Thanksgiving also, and tie in some of the acorn and leaves into it. So let me show you my plan. The table, when it has all the leaves in it, is 84 inches long. So that's the length I'm going to make the table runner. And then I figured 18 inches wide would work well for having maybe a few things on top of the table runner, but still very visible and easy to see. And we can still set the dishes and place settings around the table runner, and it's not going to be in the way. So that seems to be a good size for my table. I want to make 4 what I'm calling main blocks that are going to be 12 by 12 inches finished. And then 3 what I'm going to call sashing
blocks that are going to be 9 by 12 inches, and that's where I'm going to applique some oak leaves and acorns. So I'll show you my plan for that. And then there's going to be just the background as the border, so 3 by 84 inches for top and bottom border, and then the sides are going to be 4.5 by 12 inches. And I just picked these dimensions because I thought, looking at what I want to applique and the block size, and what would be reasonable for a border, how wide I want to make this table runner, this worked well for me. You can make skinnier borders, bigger borders, choose larger or smaller blocks, have larger or smaller sashing pieces. There's so many things you can do. You just want to come up with something that works for your table. So let me show you what my plan for the blocks are, and I'll also show you the fabric I selected. So for the main block, I'm getting it out of this book called Flower Farm Sampler by Shelley Cavanna, and it's going to be this block here, except I'm going to use colors that complement my dishes. And that block is called English Rose. It's block number 2. And you'll notice the finished block size is 24 inches by 24 inches. I'm going to halve that size and do 12 by 12 finished. And I have a video, I'll post the link to it, that shows you how to do the math if you want to enlarge or reduce a block size. So since I'm going to 12 inches and 12 goes evenly into 24, it should make for some pretty straightforward cutting. It shouldn't give me funky fractions to work with and have to cut. So that will be nice. It's something to keep in mind if you are going to enlarge or reduce, is try to use a number that shares similar factors or goes into one of the sizes evenly. Something I didn't notice when I was calculating fabric requirements is that these yardage requirements make 2 blocks. I'm going to need 4, but since I'm halving the sizes, I should be able to just keep the same yardage requirements that are listed in here. So that's the plan. Let me show you what fabric I chose. For the background, not just for the block, but for the entire table runner, I chose this kind of linen color. It's textured, kind of thatched looking background fabric. And when I went into the fabric store, I just brought pictures of the dishes. It's a little darker than the plate, but that's okay. I think it's still in that cream tone family and will look nice. So I have a lot of extra fabric because I did not pay attention to the yield too. So I have kind of double what I need for these blocks, but that's okay because I did want to make some napkins too that went along with it. So I should have plenty to make some coordinating napkins. For the rest of the block, I'm going to use, for what they're calling fabric 12, the darkest outer color. I'm going to use my darkest print here. And I'll just let you see what it looks like with the plate each time. For this one, which I'm calling medium, it's bright pink here. I wanted something that would contrast, so I didn't want to do just another shade of red. I wanted more contrast. So I picked this beautiful fabric with the metallic gold in it. Even though the background is light, there's so many dark colors on it. I thought it would work well as kind of a medium in this block. And I also like these scalloped flowers in here with the gold dots because it reminds me of the scallops on the plate with the little dots in them. So that was just a nice thing that worked out. And then for this one, I'm calling medium dark. It's going to be this middle kind of plum color in here. I'm going to use this fabric, which again has the metallic gold, and I would say that the red in this one is the closest match to the plates. And so that's going to be in the middle. So you can see there's going to be some good contrast here. And finally, for the center star, this is the light fabric. I chose this one that has more of the acorn and oak leaf colors in it. So some of the ivory, and there's this darker beige in there. And so I thought those 4 together in this order would be really pretty and elegant, and again, not overtly Christmassy. So here it is with the background also. You can see them all together. So that's going to be very nice, I think. Now for my applique sashing pieces, I'll be cutting some rectangles out of the same background fabric. And my plan is to have a finished size of 9 by 12 inches. So what I did to see what would look nice, I just took my cutting mat, and so from this edge to the ruler is 9 inches, and then 12 would be up here. I can get most of that in frame. So I just Googled acorn silhouettes and oak leaf silhouettes and found some shapes that I liked. I took the image and put it in a Google Doc where you can enlarge or reduce the size to get it to what you want it to be. And so I'm going to trace these onto template plastic, most likely, and applique them onto my background fabric. And so you might notice that this is a large space for this small acorn and the leaf. But my plan was to center the acorn, and right now I'm just eyeballing it. I'll have 2 tones of brown, so that's why it's separated here, but they'll be connected back together. And I thought I'd take the oak leaf and just make an X with it. So I'll cut these shapes onto some template plastic, most likely, and applique them, and I'll show you that later on in the video. But I just thought, yeah, making an X would be nice, and that would go in between the main blocks. So my fabric choices for the acorns are going to be these 2 browns, and I tried to pull something that had gold metallic in it also. This was a fat quarter that was already in the fabric store, and so I think that'll be the top because it's just a little darker, and then the body will be this one. And you really don't need much. You're going to need 3 acorns all together. So if this is the body, just 3 inches in a strip, just scraps would work well for this. But that's going to be the body, and then the acorn top. So I'll have plenty of this brown left over. And then for the leaves, same thing. There's going to be 12 leaves needed total. So 1/8 of a yard of fabric will give you enough to have the leaves. So I got this dark rich green with the gold in it also. I think this is from the Glad Tidings line. I didn't get enough to capture it on the selvage, but it was from that section when I was looking. So again, background with the leaves and the acorns. I think will all look really pretty together. And so for the backing, I know I'm doing acorns and oak tree themed on the front, but this one looks nice, even though it's a pine tree of some sort. I like the gold in it, and then the cream I thought is really pretty with the pops of white. I just really like this fabric, so I thought it'll be nice on the back. And for the binding, since it's going to be heavy cream on the front and back, I thought this rich deep red would be pretty. It has some holly in there, and I know this one's a little more Christmassy with the snowflakes, but the binding's going to be so small, and I like that pop of red and a small motif for the binding. So that is the fabric plan. If you want to see the fabric requirements that I've calculated for this, you could pause and take a picture. Again, this would work for a table runner that's 18 by 84 inches finished, just to give you an idea of the yardage required. I had adjusted the English rose fabric requirements, except I forgot to do the background. It's only 3/4 yards of the background needed, and so I had doubled it, not realizing that the fabric requirements make two 24-inch blocks. So 3 3/4 yards is what's needed for the background, but everything else should be accurate. If I find that I was off somewhere in my calculations when I'm done, I'll make sure at the end to address that. But I'm going to first cut the border strips because they're going to be the longest and I don't want to have to patch them together out of a bunch of little pieces. So I'm going to need 4 3.5 by width of fabric strips. I'll join 2 of them to make the top border and 2 of them to make the bottom border, which should be 3.5 by 8.5 inches unfinished. The side borders are going to be 5 by 12.5. These are all unfinished sizes. For my applique rectangles, they're going to get trimmed down to 9.5 by 12.5, but I added an extra 1/4 inch on each side because sometimes when you applique, if it's not completely flat, there might be a little puckering or bunching that can lose a little bit of your dimension. And so I just figured it's easier to trim down to size than come up short after you've appliqued all the pieces on. And then 3/4 yards of background fabric to make the 4 reduced 12 by 12 English rose blocks. So the English rose fabric requirements are just right from the book. Fabric 12 that they call in the book, I'm calling that the darkest fabric. Fabric 14 is the medium. Fabric 13 is a medium dark. And fabric 19 is the lightest. So that will give you some nice contrast. The acorns and oak leaves, you need very little. 3 by 12 inch rectangle or just scraps should give you enough for your acorn. So 2 shades of brown, each brown rectangle 3 by 12 inches, and 1/8 of a yard of green fabric. Backing 1 1/4 yards should be plenty. You could probably get away with 1. I like to make it a little bigger though, just in case something is a little crooked. I like there to be plenty around all sides of the top when I machine quilt it. And then binding, I'm going to do 2 1/4 inch strips. So the binding will be a little skinnier than I usually do on large quilts. So you need 3/8 yards of fabric for your binding. And again, it's going to be a finished size of 18 inches by 84 inches if all goes according to plan. So I'm going to go ahead and get started first by making those strips. That'll be quick and I'll just set them aside before getting into the English rose blocks. When it comes to cutting from yardage, I like to find the largest dimension size for that fabric. So with my darkest fabric, it's going to be 3 1/8 inches. And so I cut it about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch wider than that so that I can treat it either with best press, or in this case, I'm just going to use my misting bottle with water because fabric can shrink. And so I want a little bit of extra so I can trim it down accurately from there. But the reason I start with the largest is if I don't end up using all of it, I can then take my smaller pieces and still cut from the strip. And so that way I'm not just cutting random little shapes out of my yardage and, getting rotary blade nicks in the fabric. I just feel like it might be, a little more wasteful trimming some of it down, but it's just so much more manageable to work with. So that's going to be the plan for these as I cut the shapes out that I need. And I did all the math to reduce the size of the blocks by half. And so there are a couple pieces that are going to have 1/8 or 5/8 in it, but my ruler does go to the eighths. And so I'll still be able to cut them. It just takes a little more paying attention because it's not a fraction that I use as much, but still available on the ruler. I've already cut some of these out from a previous strip. Now, something you'll want to remember if you're reducing the size or enlarging is adjusting the number of pieces. So I had mentioned before that I could keep the fabric requirements the same because they yield 2 blocks and I'm having the size, so I'll get 4 blocks. But what I do need to adjust is the quantities. So I've done the math to get the sizes, but if it says I need 8 pieces in the pattern, I need to double it to 16 because I'm making 4 blocks. So just make sure you read carefully and know how many pieces the original size makes and how many pieces you need when you reduce your sizes. This particular piece, I need 3 1/8 inches across. And so even adding that extra little bit of fabric to account for shrinkage, you can see I'm just making it here. And I added an extra 1/8. So very little came off, definitely less than an 1/8. I'm making sure to use the lines I've already cut as a guide because I know those are straight and that'll help me cut off any excess. So now I still have quite a bit of this strip left, but it's large enough for me to make the other pieces. So now I'm just going to look for my next largest size and cut from there. That way, if I end up using all of it, in theory, I should have my smallest pieces of the fabric left to cut, and I don't have to cut so much from the yardage. After lots of cutting, I have my pieces ready to go to make 4 blocks. I'm going to just chain piece for each step to make it go quicker. My step 1 units are finished. I have 16 of them, and at this point they measure 4 1/4 inch square. And so the next step is going to be to take each of these step 1 units and take 2 F rectangles. This is the medium fabric, and 1 fabric E. This is the one I'm calling medium dark. And we'll sew these 2 together to make a row and these 2 together to make a row. And then we'll connect the 2 rows. And I'll also be spinning the seams when I press just to reduce bulk. So I'll show you what that looks like. But I'm going to do this for all 16 units, and that will be step 2. I'm ready to spin the seams on my step 2 units. And the reason you might want to spin seams is to reduce bulk. So right here where these 4 fabrics intersect, you can feel a considerable difference in the thickness there. And that's because even though I have one seam going this way and another this way to nest, I have this third seam that's pressed to one side and it's overlapping. And so it just creates some more bulk that you might want to take out. And so spinning the seams allows you to do that. So you take the last seam that you stitched, which is this horizontal one here, and you can just fold one side back. And then you're going to take out the vertical stitches above that horizontal stitch line. Now, something I did not think about, I just kind of did out of habit because I've been working on my knitted blooms blocks, is I have been back stitching at the beginnings and ends just to prevent some stitches from coming undone as I handle them. And I just did that without thinking that I'm going to be popping these seams out. So it's still simple enough to do, but you might have to just do it on both sides. But I've just popped those stitches out. There's usually 2 or 3. And then open it back up. And you're going to pull back that final seam that overlaps. And you should see a 4 patch. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's how you know you have spun the seam, as they say. Then you can just give it a press. I like to give it a little steam. And then if you feel in that same spot, it is considerably flatter. And then the last thing I like to do is just put it under the clapper. So I'll do it one more time. Take that last seam that I sewed, flip one side down, pop out those stitches, being careful not to go below the horizontal stitch line. And then open it again. Now, if you're wondering, am I doing it right? Look for that 4 patch. If I had done something like this, for example, if I had just opened that last seam, I would see 1, 2, and then 3 fabrics going across. This is the same fabric, but it's 2 different pieces. So I want to make sure I pull that last seam all the way down. And now I can see this dark red piece is showing itself. So just watch for that 4 patch, and that's how you know you've done it. So I'm going to go ahead and finish doing this for all 16 of my pieces, and then we'll move on to step 3. For step 3, I'm going to attach 2 K-squares to the corners of my unit that have my medium fabric. And I'll use the stitch and flip method. There's a few ways you can do it. One is to take a ruler and pencil or any marking tool that you'd normally use on your fabric and just draw a diagonal line from corner to corner on the wrong side of the fabric. You could also, I'll do it this way, fold it in half, corner to corner. So you have a diagonal crease, like so. And you can put that in the corner and stitch on that line or stitch on your drawn line. Or I'll be using seam tape on my sewing machine, which just allows you to follow the line on the seam tape. You just line up the tips of your square with the line on the seam tape. So I'll show that in a moment. But I'm going to do that for each side. And so we'll use the sew and flip method, and it'll end up looking something like this, just much neater. And it gives this fabric a nice point. This medium fabric will have a nice point to it. And so then I'll cut a 1/4 inch away from the stitch line. So I cut the tips off, and then that will reduce the bulk when I press the remaining fabric back down. So I'm going to go ahead and take these over to the machine with my stack of K-squares, and you can also see how I use that seam guiding tape. All right, I've got my seam tape ready, and the way I put it on is just lowering the needle a bit so I can see where it's hitting, and I put the tape so that this red line will line up with that needle, and it comes off just like washi tape. It's easy to peel off and adjustable. In fact, when I need to change the bobbin or put it away, I just lift this and pop it in the little storage drawer and then just reattach. And so if it's not quite lined up and you test it out, you can just lift it and try again. So I'm going to send a little bunny tail through. And then I'm going to chain piece my 16 units. So I have wrong sides together. And you could pin it in place, but these aren't too big, so I'm just going to hold them. And so I'm lining the tip of my square on the red line. I have the other tip about to go under the needle. Sometimes when I do the next piece, I just lift the presser foot, get it lined up right in the corner of the square, and then line up the other tip to the red line. And as I feed it through, I just want to make sure that that corner stays lined up with my red line. And by the time it goes off the tape, it's easy to see that it's about to hit the needle where I want it to. I've got my units finished for step 3, and the corners trimmed away, the bottom 2 layers trimmed 1/4 inch away. And so I'm going to set those aside now. And for step 4, I'm going to be making some square and a rectangle units. So the A pieces are rectangular, and then I'm going to have my K and G squares. So the K squares are the ones I just used in the last unit, and these ones are slightly larger than the G squares. And so the way this will work is 2 K squares are going to be stitched and flipped on top, and 2 of the smaller G squares on the bottom. And since they're different sizes, I'm going to do opposite sides first. So it'll be right sides together, and same thing, you can draw your line from corner to corner or use any of the other methods I talked about for stitching and flipping. We'll have one like this, and then opposite corner down like this. And then once those are pressed, you do the opposite sides same way. And since these are oversized, you just want to make sure that you kind of flip them out of the way when you're doing the opposite side so you don't accidentally stitch down the whole square. Now, this will give you, having the larger size, it's going to give you a square within the rectangle, and the seam allowance at the top is going to be larger. So the overlap you'll see after I make it is going to be larger, whereas down here with the 2 smaller squares, they're going to meet at the 1/4 inch mark. There'll be a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'll show you what that looks like after I'm done sewing. So I've just attached the first 2 pieces opposite sides together, and I would just check the back, see if there's anything I need to trim, if there's overhang, and you could do this with a rotary cutter and ruler. Since it's a small piece, I feel fine using scissors, but I'm just going to trim off any excess using the back rectangle as my guide. And then I can just flip the corner back and trim the bottom 2 layers 1/4 inch away from the stitch line. on both sides. And now I'm going to do the same thing on opposite corners. So this square on top, sewn down this way, and then this square sewn down this way. So here's that square in a rectangle, and this is what I was talking about, how you'll have more than a 1/4 inch from the point. Whereas down on this side, when you sew your 1/4 inch seam, it's going to go right to that point. But this one's going to have more of this background fabric showing above the point. And the reason why you might want to do a square and a rectangle as opposed to a square and a square is if you need a square in a taller piece, and that way you don't have to attach more fabric to the top or bottom. So it gives you similar results, but you just need a longer piece. So I'm just going to trim everything flush with my dark A piece in the back here. And then we'll trim away a 1/4 inch again from the stitch line on both sides. And now I just need to make 15 more. My step 4 units are finished, and for step 5 I'm going to be making square and a square units using 2 G squares in the upper corners and 2 H squares in the bottom corners. So same method as this one, only this will be on a square piece in the center. Now I'm going to sew the 2 units together, and to do that and preserve my points, I'm going to take a pin and poke it right at the intersection of the threads. So it will be coming through at the tip of my square. And then I'm going to poke it through the tip of the second unit. And it should come through at the intersection point on the other side. I'll line up my corners. And then when I go to sew, I'll just back stitch at the beginning, sew a 1/4 inch down. It should hit right at the intersection point on both sides. And then when I get to the end, back stitch again just to keep the threads from unraveling. And then I will press the seams open. My units are ready to go to assemble the main block. I finished attaching the 2 pieces from the last step to make these skinny rectangular units, and I also assembled these center units, which are just another square in a square, made the same way as this one that I already demonstrated. And I'm going to use my cutting mat to help me transport these pieces to the sewing machine. But first, I'll show you how this block will go together. So first I'm going to take a square and a square center, and
I'm going to build a star with the rectangular units. So you're going to want to make sure that the outer corner fabric matches the fabric that'll be touching it on the rectangular unit. Something else you could look at is the center diamond should match the outer diamond when you put this together. So I'm going to just build around the center, and you'll see a star form here. It's kind of this gold cream color. And then you'll take 4 of your square units to make the corners. And you want to make sure that the non-background fabrics are all going toward the center of the block, like so. I just love how these colors look together. It's just so pretty and elegant. So that's going to be what the block looks like. I'll start by sewing these top 3 pieces together to make row 1, and then we'll have a skinny row 2 in the middle, and then this will be row 3. I will press the seams in the direction the pattern tells me to, and then we'll connect these 2 rows together and then this last row, and that'll complete the block. Now, something to keep in mind when connecting these pieces is we'll have more diamond tips to connect. So just like before when we made the rectangular pieces, we'll want to poke a pin through the intersection point of the threads and then match it to the corner tip of the diamond and just pin a couple times to hold it in place. So we'll do that a few times. Now, another area to keep in mind is where these fabrics here come together. This is going to be my white fabric, and then I have my kind of brick red with the gold fabric. I'm going to want this point to touch with this square here, and when I sew a 1/4 inch, if I preserve that point, it should look something like that, where it touches in the corners. And then I'm also going to watch the background triangle here. When I fold it over, I'll just make sure that they're aligned, that the seams are lined up where one is on top of another, and I'll use lots of pins, and that should help me to get nice clean edges when this all comes together. So there are lots of places to be careful around and pin carefully, make sure they're aligned. So it's okay to go slow, and if you have to take out some seams and redo it, if it's not as accurate as you'd like, that's okay. I'm fully expecting to have to do that. The last tip I have is to stack, if I'm making 4 blocks, make stacks of 4 in each piece, which will allow me to chain piece and make all 4 blocks at once. So, for example, I can start with these 2 pieces, but make 4 sets of these 2 pieces, and then I'll do 4 sets of these 2, 4 sets of these 2. So all 4 blocks will be coming together at the same time. And so that way, when I finish one block, I'm actually finishing all 4. So I'm going to go ahead and finish making these piles and sewing as I described, and I'll show you how they turn out. My main blocks are finished, and they just turned out beautifully. I love the colors, and all the points ended up nice and crisp, and so I'm excited to put these into the table runner. Now I'm going to make what I'm calling the sashing blocks. They're not quite as wide as these 12.5-inch squares, but they are still pretty large, and we're going to put our applique pieces on them.
So I have 3 of these rectangles cut out. They're about a 1/2 inch oversized, so I can trim them down later. I've traced my acorn and oak leaf onto some template plastic. So I'm going to cut these out, and then I'll be tracing a total of 12 leaves, so 4 for each rectangle. We traced on the green. And then I need 3 acorns. So I'm going to do the top in the darker brown here and the bottom in this lighter brown. So I'm going to trace these pieces, and I'll show you the method that I'll use to applique them. The reason I'm using template plastic is because I'll be tracing several pieces. So if it was just, 1 or 2, I might just use the paper, but because I'll be tracing these several times, I don't want a paper template to get worn down or ripped or anything. So this is just a little sturdier. Certainly not necessary, but it'll just make for more consistent tracing. So I demonstrated this applique technique in my last video, which I will link down below with a timestamp in the description if you want to jump right to that and see this in more depth. But one thing I didn't show that helps is to put a little bit of sandpaper underneath your fabric just to keep it from slipping when you're going around tracing. So I have my fabric wrong side up, so you can see the back of it. I have my template with the wrong side also up. I'm leaving a little bit of space in between each one I trace because I need a 1/4 inch to be trimmed around it when I'm done. So don't butt them up right next to each other, but leave a little bit of space to leave some seam allowance. And then since this is a dark fabric, I'm using a chalk pencil, but if you had a light fabric, you could use just a regular pencil or a water soluble marker, or just something that isn't going to bleed through to the other side. What we're tracing here is our sewing line, but the sandpaper underneath just keeps it from slipping around. And when you have something like this that has a lot of little curves and turns, it's really helpful to keep it from sliding around. So I need quite a few of these. I won't make you watch me trace all 16 of them, but I just wanted to give that tip and also point out that video that has a more in-depth look at how I do this process. I've got my leaves cut apart, and now I'm going to prepare the inner facing to sew to the other side. So I'm just using this Pellon sew-in interfacing. It's PLS36 for the style number, and this one is not a fusible. And I'm just going to cut out pieces that are approximately the same size as my rectangles here. Doesn't have to be exact, but it just needs to be enough to go underneath each leaf. So I'll just kind of cut some strips like this, and then just cut down. So I'm going to do this for all 12 of my leaves. And I'll do the same thing for the acorn pieces once I prepare those. Might be able to get 3 out of each. Yeah, so that'll be good. So I'm just going to keep going with these, do my acorns, and then I will sew along the line using a walking foot that has some kind of window that allows me to pivot with the needle down and just see what I'm about to sew. I've finished stitching on my drawn lines, and so the next step I'm going to do is just cut about 1/4 inch away from my stitch lines with pinking shears. And this is a tip that I saw Rachel from Stitching with Rachel's YouTube channel demonstrate not too long ago, and I tried it out on my last applique project when I made the quilt for the book The Little Ghost Who Was a Quilt, and it worked really well when you have pieces with curves like I do here. Just when you turn the pieces right side out, it seemed to really help. So I'm going to do it again. And you could also, if you don't have pinking shears, if you have places with tighter curves, just make a few snips around those curves, just not going through the stitches, but close to the stitches. And that works also. I'm going to just demonstrate with these pieces. So once I have it trimmed, I'm going to pull the inner facing apart from the fabric. Just snip it somewhere in the middle, and then I can make a longer snip just to be able to turn it right side out. And if it tears a little bit, that's okay. The point of the inner facing is to just give the shape a little more structure, and also it allows you to fold the seam under so you have nice clean seams when you sew the pieces onto your background fabric. You can use a chopstick or some kind of point turner to help with the curves. Just go gently because the inner facing is delicate. This is my bottom of the acorn. Oopsie, I just poked through there, but that's okay. I'm going to press it pretty soon here. Just flatten it all out. So I can tell there's my acorn tip, and I know that this part should be a little more rounded, and then the top goes straight across, but there is that little corner I want to make sure is turned out. Okay, so there's my shape, and then I'm going to just make sure that the inner facing is tucked away neatly underneath. And I'll just take a dry iron and press. And there is my acorn base. I'll do that with the cap of the acorn as well. One that I will not be doing, as I tried it out, that was the leaf. And there were just too many tight little turns, and this method just didn't work well with the skinny little stem at the bottom. It just kind of got all torn up. It does not look good. So it was an experiment. I wish I had just tried one before sewing all of them, because what I'm going to do now is take these stitches out, remove the inner facing, and then I have some heat and bond paper that's going to allow me to just cut directly on the lines. And maybe I'll even do that, just cut on the stitch lines, but use the heat and bond on it. And that will allow me to raw edge applique these leaves onto my background. So I still have a little bit of extra green fabric, so this isn't going to cause a big problem for me, but I am going to remove the inner facing on those. So first I'll finish with these, and then I'll show you my new plan for the leaves. All right, I removed the inner facing from my leaves, and I'm going to take this product called Flexi Fuse. It's like Heat and Bond. It has a ridged glued side that I'm going to leave face up and then put my leaf fabric on top with right side up, and then just following the package directions, about 5 to 8 seconds to bond the paper to the fabric. And then I will draw the leaf on this paper, cut it out, and I'll be able to peel that paper off. And the other side also has an adhesive, and so I'll be able to then press it onto my background fabric. So I'll let that cool for a moment, and I'll do it with these ones as well, but I'm just going to demonstrate with this one. So I'm going to use my template again, and this time I want the right side up. What's nice about the template plastic and doing it this way is if there was something in it you wanted to capture, you can kind of see a window of what you're going to cut out. But for mine, it's all pretty similar. So I'm just going to trace around it. And I'll be cutting out on this line this time instead of sewing on it. Okay, so I'm just going to cut along my drawn lines. Okay, this piece can just be discarded, but then when I separate this, I'm not going to take it all the way off because I'm not quite ready to attach it, but you'll see there's this little sheen, and the glue is transferred from the paper to the back of my fabric, and so I can place it where I want it to be and then press it with a dry iron following the directions. Again, mine say 5 to 8 seconds to attach it. And then from there, you can choose what kind of stitch, like a zigzag stitch, a blanket stitch, something to tack down the edges, because when you wash it, you know, it might come up a bit or fray a little on the edges because it's raw edge applique. So you'll just choose a stitch that really secures the edges down to your fabric. So I have my background piece, and I've just taken a regular pencil and drawn a really light line corner to corner so that I can make my leaves a bit symmetrical and find the center for my acorn. So this piece is a little taller than this one, so I'm just going to kind of eyeball it and make it go a little bit above that center point. And then for these ones, because it's not the Flexi Fuse, I'm going to just put a little dab of glue just to hold it in place until I can sew it. You could also pin it. And I'll even take my iron and press it down and just help that glue to adhere. And then I'm going to take my leaves, and I need to remember that I am going to be trimming off a little from each edge and their seam allowance, so I don't want anything, you know, close to the edge. So I'm going to move it. I'm going to kind of look at the distance from the acorn to the tip of the leaf here, and then make sure that the tip of the leaf is on that diagonal line. So I'm just going to see how this looks first. So no precise measurements, just kind of eyeballing it and using those lines as a guide. Maybe something like that. And then if I have seam allowance and trim, this gap to the edge won't be so great. So I think I like how that looks. So I will go ahead and pull the paper that I had bonded to the fabric off.
And like I said, the glue is now transferred. So I'll line it back up about the same distance, line it up to my diagonal line. And then I'm just going to hold it for 5 to 8 seconds. And just being careful not to move it around. So now that's stuck on there. And I'll do the same with the others. And then I will be ready to stitch the edges down. I'll do a hidden stitch around the acorn. Like I said before, I demonstrated the process of the needle turn applique and where you don't have raw edges, so I will link that portion of the video in the description below as well. And then I'll show you how I attach these raw edge pieces. I have my acorn sewn on using a hidden stitch, and really it's just the same stitch you would use for attaching binding if you were going to hand sew it. And then I have blanket stitched around one of my oak leaves to see how it looks. And I like this. I did not have any green, dark green thread, I should say. And so I just had this one that kind of goes with the background. It was just a hand quilting thread that I had got at Joann's a couple years ago. So I have a very long piece doubled over and a knot at the end. And you can do your decorative stitch by machine as well. I just feel like because of all these little curves and corners within the curves here, that hand stitching, it gives me a bit more control. So I'm going to go clockwise, and the first thing I'm going to do is come from behind just through the background fabric so that my needle comes out on the edge but not through my leaf. And I'm going to pull it till the knot stops. And then you need to decide how long of a stitch you want. I don't want this to be too long. Maybe it's about 1/8 of an inch, not quite 1/4 of an inch. But I'm going to go through both layers and then back up through that edge. And I'm going to take the single piece of thread. So you have the double piece coming out of the eye. I'll take the single piece and I'll just tuck it under the needle. And it will make this vertical stitch here that kind of blends in, which is why I like this thread color choice. If I didn't have the green, it's pretty neutral. Now, if you wanted it to be a very noticeable decorative stitch, you might pick a thread that really contrasts and shows up, but I want it to kind of blend into the background. So then you also need to decide how far apart you want your stitches. You're going to keep them as consistent as you can. So I'm going to try to keep them, because I have so many tight curves, I want to actually keep them a little close together. So again, about somewhere between 1/8 to 1/4 inch. I'm going to start down from the edge about 1/8 or 1/4 inch, go down through both pieces of fabric, and then come up through the back side of the fabric, take my thread and tuck it behind the needle again. And then when you pull through, you'll notice, and I know it's going to be hard to see with this thread color, but you'll notice that there's a horizontal piece of thread now that's just hugging the edge of the applique piece. So I'm going to just keep doing that, go about, I'm going to say 1/4 of an inch down through both pieces of fabric, come up just through the background, make sure that the thread wraps under the needle, and pull through.
You don't want to pull too tightly. We don't want to get puckers or anything. And I just I can feel a little poke on my finger to know that it's gone through both layers. And so that's all I'm feeling for. So I'm going to keep doing this, just going around my leaf. And I'll come back when I'm at the end, either when you run out of thread, if you didn't have enough, or you're ready to do the final stitch. I'll show you how I close it off. A lot of people like to use embroidery floss, like a strand or two of embroidery floss to do blanket stitching, and that is a great option, especially because you can control the thickness. If you really want it to show up or be pretty skinny, you can decide how many strands you want to use. I just went for what's blending in with my background because I really don't want the stitches to be that visible. I just want something secure that will hold the leaf down through washes. And since I can't do the hidden stitch like on the acorn, I just wanted something that would allow the stitches to blend in. One more time, down through both layers and come up through the backing. Let's see if I can get a close-up of how that's looking. You can barely see those horizontal stitches just tracing the border of the leaves there. All right, I'm getting to the point where I'm ready to tie this off. So I've just come out from the top here. I have my original stitch right here. I think I can get one more in between so it's not such a big gap. So I'm going down through both layers, up through the back, tucking that single string behind. And now for the final stitch, because I want that horizontal stitch in between the first and last, I'm going to just go right over my original, down through the base of it, up through the top, wrap that single strand behind, and pull. And so it doubles over and should fall, and you can scoot it a little if you need to, but it should fall nicely on top of that first stitch, so you can't really tell that it's doubled. And then from there, I'm going to take my needle and go through the background fabric only, right at the edge of the leaf, and pull it through. And then it's really close to my beginning knot, so maybe just a little bit away from it, but going through a stitch. I'm gonna go just through the background fabric, under one of my stitches nearby, and then before I pull it all the way through, I'll have a little loop. I'm gonna send my needle through that loop to make a knot. And I'll do that one more time. I'm just going to go under one of my stitches, just through the background fabric, because I don't want this to show up on the leaf. Go almost all the way through, but then send the needle under that small loop. And after the second one, it should be nice and secure. And I can cut that off. I can cut that original tail a little shorter. So you can barely see the stitches in this background. It blends in so well. But now I have two of them done. I'm going to finish these other two here, and then I'll be able to see what size I have. I've been trying to keep it flat and stopping once in a while to smooth it so there's no puckering or anything. But I will trim it down to size after I have all my pieces sewn on. I should also mention, if you have to stop because you're low on thread, tie it off the same way you would as though it was your last stitch. And then to begin again, you'll do it the same way, where you'll go through a top edge first from the back, but just do it on an existing stitch, the last one that you did. Come up from the back, just through the background fabric, and then go down in over your existing stitch through both layers and come back up through the background on that same stitch, and that will secure it and just allow you to pick up where you left off and then keep going around. So my 4 English rose blocks are finished, and my 3 acorn oak leaf applique blocks are finished. I love how this green is picked up in the English rose block, and then you have the gold in here too that just ties it together, and then the dark brown with the darker burgundy color. I think it all just plays very nicely together. So the way I'm going to assemble it one more time is start with one of my 4.5 by 12 inch sashing strips, and again these are finished sizes, and then the main block, the acorn, main block, acorn, main block, acorn, main block, and then finish off with a sashing strip. And then for the top, I have these long width of fabric pieces. They're cut to 3.5 by width of fabric right now, and I will sew 2 of them together to make the top and 2 together to make the bottom, and then just trim to size. So I'm going to go ahead and assemble all of this now to complete the top of the table runner. All right, I have got to the step where I've sewn just a little less than 1/8 of an inch around the whole semicircle, including up the fold line that I pressed, which was 5 inches from the edge. I folded it and then just sewed down that fold line. Now what I wanted to demonstrate was the folding of the napkin. I thought the Jordan Fabrics tutorial did an excellent job showing all the steps, but I know my spatial reasoning isn't the strongest when I watch people fold or just build anything. Sometimes I need to be talked through it a little more. So that's what I want to do here. So the first consideration you need to make at this stage is if you're going to fold and press this way with, in this case, it's my colored fabric being folded over my light fabric, or if you want the light fabric folded over the colored fabric. So you have 2 fabrics and you need to choose. And so here's what's important to know. Here's an already assembled tree here. If I want the top of my tree to be my burgundy fabric, then I want to fold so that the burgundy fabric's on top and I can see mostly my cream fabric here. What's nice about these napkins is that they're reversible, so you can still use this fold line, and after you wash and iron them, you can just fold them any way you want. You can mix them, have some of them have a light top, some of them have burgundy, but I'm going to give this a press first because I haven't done that yet since top stitching, and I'm not using the steam in my iron just because my last iron like this, it works really well, but it did start spraying brown rusty sprays, and so I don't use water in this iron anymore. But I'm going to go ahead and fold it back on that sewn line with burgundy on top for me, and I'm just going to keep spraying. I'm using a water misting bottle. I'm not using my little project iron like I normally use. I'm using this big one just because it gets a little hotter and there's more layers to go through. Okay, so once you're at this point, you're going to do a fan fold, and you are going to have to fuss with it a little bit, most likely, to get it just right. But you're going to put your finger on the point at the bottom, so the curved edge is away from my body, the flat straight edge is toward my body. And so I'm just going to hold down on the flat side, and I'm going to fold it so that it overlaps a little bit. And so now I have a new fold line on the right, and then I want to pull back in and align on the left. Now if I do it exactly as is, this burgundy side does not align with my right fold. So I'm going to push it in just a little and then bring it forward just a little until those are all lined up. And I want to just keep that point down at the bottom that I'm touching with my index finger here. I want to keep that pressed down because that's going to hold my fold lines. So I think move the top a little bit. And just the more precise you can be, the better, but I think that looks good right there. So I'm going to just hold it and press it. First dry, and then I'll give it some mist to steam it. All right. Now this part is where I got a little confused and wanted to really talk through. Now I watched another video to see it demonstrated because I was having just such a hard time, especially when they're using different colors, like knowing what goes where. The little tree trunks are optional, but it does help as a reference point to reference the tree trunk side here. So I'm going to just turn it over so the fan fold is still on my left. So I kind of have this right angle here. And then I have the tree trunk side, or just the curved side. And so what I'm going to do is pull the tree trunk side. Here's my background fabric, my cream fabric. Notice it's on top. And I'm going to try to align it. I'm going to have to tug it down toward the bottom left a little to get it to align to all my folds that I did in the fan fold. So I'm going to line it up, and my tree trunk is still on the bottom left now. And then I'm just going to give it a little finger press. And then I'm going to take just the single side where the tree trunk is, and I want to fold it so that it's on top of all these folds. And what should happen is there's a new fold that aligns with all these folds down below on the left, and it lines up with these folds on the right. Okay, and then I'll press it. But I'm going to show that one more time. So I have my fan fold on the left, my curved edge on the right, flip it over, see that right angle, take the curved edge and move it toward the left, start angling it to match the angle of all those folded pieces down below. Match it up and finger press. So now you have a bunch of folds on the right. You have a few folds farther inside on the left. So you're going to take that tree tab there, the trunk, and you're going to fold it so that this new fold you're making lines up with the left folds, and this edge here lines up with the right folds. And then you can go ahead and press.
And I turn it over and look at it, and I can see that this corner here isn't quite at the edge, so I'm just gonna adjust it just a tad bit. That's why I didn't steam it yet. And then I'll go ahead and press, and when I like how that looks, mist it, and press those edges. And after using these and washing them, you can refold, you can reverse them. That initial line that you sew up is there to be your starting point. And so you'll have your reference point to know where to start your initial fold. Now, one thing I did notice adding these tree trunks, in the Jordan fabric directions, it said 2 inches in from the edge. I probably would have done more like 2.5. Because it's a curve and these are straight, it makes the trees, at least mine anyway, look a little tilty, which is fine. They still look like trees. But if I were to do this again, I'd probably move the trunk down just a little bit, maybe another 1/2 inch or so, or just try one and see how it looks and adjust before making all 8 of them. But it's okay, they're still really cute and it gives them some character. So I made a set with the burgundy, and then I also had these ones with the just scatter of Christmas plants on there too. And so I have 8 napkins total to set my table with the new table runner. Here's the finished table runner, and I ended up quilting lots of swirls into it on my machine. On the English roses, I used this variegated thread that has green, red, and kind of a yellowy gold in it, so it was perfect for this one. I went around the outside of the whole block, and then I also went around the little star in the middle. So it blends in very well. I thought it would be too strong of a thread color to do the rest of it, so I ended up just using a very creamy white for the thread for the swirled quilting. And then the applique just stands out there in the middle, and it just goes all the way down. For the binding, this was the first time I actually top stitched the binding on the machine. I usually hand sew the binding on the back, so I liked how quick it was. It did in places show up with the thread on the back just a little bit, but I figure it's the underside, so that's okay. And the corners, the mitered corners, turned out well. So very nice, a little bigger than I was envisioning it, but I know when I wash it, it will shrink a little. So let's take a look at the table all set with the table runner and the napkins now. I hope you've enjoyed watching my attempt to enhance the beauty of my great-great-aunt's dishes and make my table a little more inviting with some handmade touches. Now, I know this is a full video, but if you're interested in seeing that simmer pot mix package to give as a gift, stick around till the very end of the video and I'll show you how I did that. Otherwise, thanks for watching and wishing you health, happiness, and many blessings in the new year.
That simmer pot mix is still going strong on day 2. I've just been adding water to keep the levels up, but it has such a lovely fragrance and it fills a large area of the home. And so once I was happy with the ingredients and the fragrance it was emitting, I went ahead and assembled these dry simmer pot mixes in these clear cellophane cone bags. And the reason I made dry kits is because I'm giving them as gifts to family and friends, and they may not be used immediately. And so I wanted to break up the brown ingredients, most of the spices. And to do that, I wanted to include the fruits that I used in the one at home, but using fresh fruit would be sticky and messy. So drying was a great alternative. You could also, if you knew it was going to be used quickly, you could include a small apple or a small little clementine or satsuma and put it at the top of the bag if you knew it would be used right away. But this year, instead of drying fruits in the oven like we did last year to make the orange garlands, my husband noticed a dehydrator feature on the air fryer, so we gave that a try, and it worked really well this year. It was a little bit quicker than using the oven, but both are great options. It still takes time. You want to just test to see that the orange slices aren't sticky or gummy or tacky. So once it's completely dry, you can include them in the bags here. So I have the orange slices, the apple slices. They were left on our tree. We were trying to find a way to use those last few remaining apples, so this is great. And then I also cut little sprigs of pine branches to include. So everything that I used in my pot is in this bag, and I'm happy with that fragrance. I also included a desiccant packet in each one since some will be mailed, or like I said, I don't know how soon they'll be used. So just to keep some moisture out and further prevent molding. I printed these cards on Canva explaining how to use the mix and some optional things you might add to add color or change the fragrance up. So fresh cranberries, bay leaves, slices of fresh apples, oranges, or lemons. My daughter colored the little orange slice with the pine branch and cinnamon stick there. And then I used the wire twisty to close the bag and then tied it with baker's twine to attach the little direction label there. This is a quick assembly line project that you can just make in a large batch, however many you need. And I think it's just a fun way to bring that cozy fragrance that people seem to enjoy this time of year into their homes. So it was fun to make, and I sure hope the recipients enjoy these as much as I have.
Thank you again for watching.